is, look, what does it take to become a Mufti? Right, now, I have to explain this so people have an understanding. A Mufti currently would be in the level, in the countries where you have Mufti courses, they are in the realm of what is a PhD standard, okay, a doctorate level. So, although doctorates may vary from 3 to 6 years, but of that kind of, it's not given the equivalence of a doctorate. It's not given that equivalence, but it's a post-master's study, which can consist of anything between 1 to 3 years, depending where it's done. So, for example, mine was 2 years. Now so wherever you are, it will vary sometimes. On average, they're 1 to 2 years. Some places have an extended 3rd year. So, but the level it's kind of pitched at, it's postmasters. So you can't really do it until you've done that kind of level. Now, a lot of people kind of ask sometimes, oh, well, they see questions or whatever. So what's actually involved in all of this? Well, what it begins with is a person has to, first of all, study, they have to take a scholar's course, an alim course. Now, this can vary anything between 6 to 8 years, for example. Now, it will cover the fundamental basic sciences within Islam. So you will have, so grouping them out as core topics, as core kind of subjects, core areas. You will have Quran, which will branch to Quran, which will branch into actual studying the Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, the recitation of the Quran, tafsir of the Quran, and the usul al-tafsir. So these kind of all fall under the Quran. You will have hadith, which is studying the actual books of hadith, studying mustalah al-hadith, studying a bit about the ilal and things like that within hadith as well. And a bit maybe on takhrij, depending on where you study. So these all fall under, and the actual books of hadith as well, that's obvious. You will have fiqh, which will cover, in essence, the actual fiqh, so anything from worship right down to the penal justice code, to everything in between, transactions, marriage, divorce, everything. You will study that. That will be the actual fiqh at an internal, at a cross, universal level throughout different schools of law, the reasoning, things like this involved. You will have usul al-fiqh, legal theory, what makes the schools of law diverse and different. Okay, so you will have that. You will have, with that as well, qawaid sometimes, which are the axioms, kind of legal axioms made to make life easy. You'll have those involved in there as well. And depending where you study or your personal study, you may also get to do maqasid, the philosophy behind the sharia, the objectives of the sharia. This is all sharia, this is all fiqh. Then you will have language, which has within it, it will have things like grammar, nahu, it will have sarf, morphology, it will have rhetoric, balagha, which includes things like how do you understand, which is a bit like, those of you who are familiar with discursive psychology, it's a bit like the discursive approach. When is something used as a command? When can something be used as metaphor? When can, things like that, okay. You will also, part of this language, have adab, which is literature, and you will also have ilm al-arud, poetry. Okay, so that's all part of that. Then you will also have some logic, some books on logic and philosophy. You'll study them. This will really form part of the theology, the aqidah section, where if you want to add that to creed, I mean, you don't need to, but it's, if you want to group it in that group block, where you'll study aqidah books, books on actual beliefs, what you believe, the different sects, what they believed, things like this, the disagreements, with that some philosophical discussions, some logic, things like that put into that. You will also study Islamic history. Now, these are broadly speaking the kind of sciences within Islam. Now, you may have one or two others, but these are broadly speaking them. So you will study these at a fundamental level, elementary level. You will study these at an intermediate level. That is necessary. You will study some of these at a very advanced level. So an elementary level means you cover the thing in its skeletal structure. You will, at an intermediate level, you will cover them with differences of opinion. and reasoning. Advanced is highly meticulous, kind of intricate internal detail and external. So you will study some of these at an advanced level. So for example, fiqh, etc. You may study usul. You may study some of these at an advanced, but all of them at an intermediate level. Now, that you will do just to become a scholar, okay, an alim. Now, in your final year of your alim course, you will study all the major books of hadith from cover to cover. So that includes Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Nasa'i, Muwatta of Imam Malik, Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar of Imam Tahawi. These kind of books you'll study from cover to cover, all of them. The scholars and the classes in the final year, in this year, they call it Dawra Hadith. The classes would begin on average. They start. I mean, in the first few they were a bit slower, but they eventually got to beginning at 7:15 in the morning, and they would last till midnight. Okay, with breaks in between. So we would study from class would begin about 7:15. They would last till about I think it's about 11:30. Then you would have your lunch break. You'd be back at about, I think, is it 1:30, something like that, 1:30 to 2. You'd be back. You'd study till about 4:30 or 5, depending on what time of the year, and then you'd have a break for Asr. You'd come back after Maghrib. You'd study for another hour. You have a break for food, and then you'd come back after Isha and you study till midnight. So that is the final year. That's not all the year, but that's all the years, but that's the final year. The general academic year would go from something like 8 in the morning, 8:30ish in the morning, 8 in the morning, depending, till about 5:30, 5, something like that. So you'd go from about that time to that time with those breaks in between. But the final year you'd study till midnight. Now, that you'd complete all those books. The scholars would divide the book. So for example, one scholar is teaching Bukhari from the beginning, another scholar is teaching Bukhari from the middle onwards, right from the beginning. So they're kind of going, same thing with Sahih Muslim, with Tirmidhi and so on. They're dividing books for you. Each lesson would consist like an hour approximately. Now, you would do all of that. You will be tested on average 3 times a year. Okay. You must, the final end of year test, you must pass every single test, every single exam. This isn't one of those where you fail some and you get away with. You must pass every single exam, right? If you failed on a minor subject but generally passed, they may be some kind of reluctant. I mean, some kind of like concession where they let you go. Otherwise, normally the rule is every single, especially the end of year, every single book that you are tested in, every single topic, you must pass, right? So, and these tests, there's 2 other. Throughout the year, the semesters. Okay, so you have like 2 tests and the final end of year test. This goes right to the very end, to Dawra Hadith when you're studying Hadith. So for example, like so that includes me. I've had to study. I passed never did I ever fail. In fact, I got top marks, people, top marks, right? Took positions. Alright, you know what I'm talking about. So the thing is, to be honest with you, a lot of the time I never even used to revise. The thing is, I just enjoy the subject so much that I would just remember. So in my final, in our final Dawra year, I took 3rd position out of a class of 90. There were about 88, 89 students. So I mean, this gives you, and they awarded me a prize for as well, 3 positions. So, and that was without revision. I'm being honest with you. Being too lazy sometimes. I can't bother revising. So anyway, the point being, you do all that, then once you've graduated as a scholar, you can undertake a Mufti course. Okay, a Mufti course, depending on the institute, will be 1 or 2 years. On average, they're 2 years usually. So the one I did was 2 years. During the Mufti course, you will study several books. which are highly detailed on fiqh and Islamic laws and rulings. You will study the principles of how to give fatwa. You will practice giving fatwa on every, so you will have a target. So for example, within the first year, you must issue and grant 80 fatwa. In the second year, it'll be more than that. So, I mean, you will kind of give these fatwas under the supervision of the teachers. They will mark them, assess them, give you feedback. Meanwhile, you'll have your core modules, and modules will change every term. So for example, one of our modules was on medical issues on body parts, organ transplants. One of the modules was on interest, riba. One of them was on taqleed and stuff like this, and one of them was on so you will have different kind of modules always changing. You will have your core books of fiqh. So Lillahi alhamd, the institute I was in had a Maliki resident Mufti, Tunisian Mufti, Sheikh Mufti Salim al-Tunisi. So under his tutelage, I was allowed to also to do the Maliki ifta as well. So I had my own books, the Mudawwanatul Kubra or the Mudawwana, other books, commentary, depending on what part of the year I did. Also, I included certain commentaries on the Risala by Nafrawi as an example. I also covered certain volumes of Muwahibul Jalil, which is a commentary on Mukhtasar Khalil. I covered also the Muwafaqat of Imam Shatibi during my Iftar years. I covered, so these are some examples. Okay, the Muwafaqat in itself is actually 4 volumes condensed into 2 thick volumes of Imam Shatibi on the Maqasid of Sharia. So these were things I covered in that year. In addition to my own little musings and wanderings on, I had a fascination with grammar, so I used to really look into a lot of that, but that was just personal. That wasn't part of the actual reading. We also had to do a Ibn Abidin, certain volumes of, which is Raddul Muhtar, the Fatawa Shamiyah, which are Ibn Abidin's Hanafi Fatawa, really, the kind of seal of the Hanafi thing. So I had to do both. I had to sit an exam for Hanafi fiqh and for Maliki fiqh. So this was done in 2 years, in the final 2 years, yeah. So that is all really, just to give you an idea. For me, I did the Alim course in 6 years. I did this in 2 years. Prior to that, I had studied probably a year and a half in Damascus, various sciences and things like that. And so that's, and when I left, actually at the ending of, this is in the late 90s, and then whilst I was in Damascus, I began memorizing the Quran, which I completed in Pakistan, in Islamabad. The thing is, which I did with tafsir. So I would have a certain target that every year I would have to complete certain books of tafsir as I go over the Quran. If it didn't include them entirely, it would at least include covering about 70% of them. So I covered most of Qurtubi's tafsir, Nahas's tafsir. I covered most of like Ibn Kathir, Tafsir al-Madhari, Ruh al-Ma'ani. I covered even Ruh al-Bayan. But things like, just to give you an example, okay, so that was my hifth with which hifth is not a requirement to be salah, but that it's a good thing if you can memorize the Quran. So these were just to kind of graduate. I think I concluded properly in about 2005 my studies. Now, following which you just have the beginning to now venture out into the world, and your views and your mind will continue to radically develop. Okay, because up until now you've been in an environment. Now you'll be out there in the real world dealing with people's issues. You will, like, my own views have so drastically changed since in the last 10 years. So, I mean, but it's that being put out there, interacting with people, but with other sciences as well, which will enrich your understanding of the Sharia. So, for example, with me, I qualified in things like whether it was actually did a master's in education. I did a degree, postgraduate degree in teaching for a while. I mean, I did that as well. These things obviously contribute, and I specialized in religion, so that kind of gave me that, and philosophy gave me some more understanding. But then a degree in psychology, which I did over part-time over 6 years. Really, that degree as well massively helped my understanding of the Sharia. It really made me view things from a different perspective. So this is just part of the journey, and the journey is ongoing. It's ongoing. I mean, you know, your learnings will, things you're learning every day will make you reflect and think, oh, I never thought of it like that. Whilst teaching, you're continuing to learn. You know, they say, like, teaching to teach is to learn twice. So all these in between, obviously, part of what I did as well. When you complete your Dawra Hadith, you will be granted an Ijazah, which is a chain of transmission. You'll be authorized to teach with a chain of transmission going back to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself through those books. So right back to Imam Bukhari, then his chain, right back to Imam Muslim, right back to Imam Malik, and so on. This, although is very common in the Indo-Pak world, it's actually very rare in the rest of the Muslim world. So just to give you an idea, what I had done in between as well, this is in the early 2000s, before when Damascus was still a peaceful place. I had visited and recited the whole Quran onto my Sheikh Abdul Hadi al-Tabbah, who was a student of Sheikh Tarabishi, the entire Quran from right to Wan Nas, and he granted me Ijazah, a chain of transmission through Hafs, in the riwayah of Hafs, going right back to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and an authorization to teach that. In addition, a person keeps their general networking going on. So in between, I visited other places. I visited Al-Azhar, where I spent a very short time but got to network with certain ulama. In Egypt, in Morocco, I go very often. Many ulama, they're great ulama I've met with, I've kind of spent some time with, benefited from, and continue from a distance to benefit from, whether it's through just WhatsApp and stuff like that. But I went and visited, those of you who may have heard of Sheikh Abu Wais Muhammad Abu Khubza, a legendary kind of, I mean, he's an amazing, he's quite very old actually, but still in great health, alhamdulillah, may Allah preserve him. He's the one of the key students of Hafidh Ahmad al-Ghumari, and he has many chains in fiqh as well. So he authorized me, gave me ijazah in fiqh through his teacher. He's got many teachers through them all, which include, his teachers include Ibn Ashur, the legend on Maqasid, and who has the 30-volume tafsir up there. And it includes Abdul Hayy al-Kattani, Al-Hafidh Abdul Hayy al-Kattani, who has, I had to buy his 3-volume book on his chains. So those, he authorized through them to have that connection. Now, these chains are just sometimes more a kind of just a heritage, a tradition. So this is why I wanted to link into what somebody said about traditionalists. This is traditionalism. Traditionalism is to have a connection with tradition, to have yourself rooted, to have this understanding, this authority rooted in the tradition that we have, right? Which is exactly what I believe, what I encourage. I generally, all madhabs, all schools of law are good. I generally tend to promote the school of Medina, and that's what I follow. And this goes right back through with a chain, which I have, an unbroken chain going back to Imam Malik and right back to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this is traditionalism. Modernism would be to say we don't need them, like get rid of them, like we are ourselves. You see, what we say is just like them. How about just the way they did, you using the tools, the data, the information, the ilm, the kind of style, the usul that they provided, you rule for your own day and age. You see, Islam has come for your day and age. This is why Sayyidina Umar, he said, اعرف الأشباه والنظائر وقس عليها. Know the similarities, know the rulings that have gone before you, and then analogize upon them, make analogy upon them. This is true traditionalism. Traditionalism is not a kind of a dogmatism, in saying, well, traditionalism means we no longer have thinking faculties and we can't be critical, we can't be think about our own day and age. We only think of, we ought to be living in their day and age. The truth is, Imam Malik wasn't living the way the Sahaba were living. they had advanced. In Imam Malik's time, for example, he had devised a system where he would have certain people, they come for learning, they would actually make queues and lines, and they would group. At this point, he would take all of them into this particular room. He would have a certain time of the day in which he would cover fiqh. He would have a certain other time of the day in which he would cover hadith. He would have certain different doors allocated to where people come. These things, this was new. This wasn't something that Sahaba used to do. This was something that the Prophet did. So these things are a system that these are devised for their day and age. Because life changes. So in our day and age, Islam is for our day and age, and we have to use the understanding that people have given, that people have they've passed the baton on to us, but we need to now apply that for our day and age. To just apply the fiqh that these people were using for their day and age is, in my understanding, pathetic. Right? So asking to review things is part of the Sharia, is part of the traditional scope of the Sharia. Okay, so the reason I mention my own learning is because that is quite often a question that, how does a person, I hear people say, these people self-proclaimed muftis. I think to myself, self-proclaimed. Okay. What I just sat down one day and just said to myself, okay, I'm a mufti. Is that I went through years, almost a decade of learning, institutional learning. I don't mean just like in institutions, living there in different continents, studying, passing rigorous exams every term to arrive at that conclusion, being authorized by people who, the Grand Mufti at the time, Mufti Abdullah Shaukat, was the key student of Mufti Taqi, who is a world-renowned Mufti. So my point is that this understanding of saying, well, look, you just sat at home and decided to call yourself a Mufti. Well, I wish I did, but that, by just calling yourself a Mufti, you don't get the skills of becoming one. Okay, so when idiots go out there, and I say this because people, they look at you and they think, well, you don't look like a Mufti. Well, first of all, I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a mandatory dress code for a Mufti. And I'm sorry to disappoint, right? But that's, so let's say that aside, the looks aside, right? What is that is a dismissive criteria for people. So they will just say, okay, the person isn't wearing a hat, he can't be a Mufti. You think, well, okay. I thought it was to do with actually learning the knowledge and being authorized in the knowledge. But, so anyway, I thought I'll clarify this and spend a bit of time on that, because it is good to actually convey this. And I also hope that by doing so, it shows people that it can be done. Okay, seeking knowledge, it can be done. It's not something which, we feel, oh my God, I can't do this, or this is too surreal. This is only for certain people out there. You can do that. How are the exams set up? Multiple choice. The exams generally, so let me give an example. They would be, depending on the subject, if it was, let's say in the final years, they will be something like, they will give you a hadith, for example, say, okay, what is this hadith talking about? And mention all the different school of laws that have this, comment or derive law from this hadith. What are their differences and their arguments included? So it would just say something along those lines, like, اشرح هذا الحديث وما استدل عليه وما اختلفوا فيه مبينا الدلائل التي استندوا إليها, something like that. So explain this hadith with the differences of opinion and the evidences of all the schools that differed upon it. That's as an example. It's not multiple choice, but you would have a choice of which. So for example, it's been such a long time now, but let's say they will give you, I don't know, 2 sets of questions and you can take any set. So you can take the top set or the bottom set, and each set would consist of, and there would be several, there would be a few sets like that of questions. That's within hadith, it would be like that. They would sometimes present problematic hadith, like they would say, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, as an example, I remember this as from one exam, that naha anil, that there were certain drinks that the Prophet, certain containers and vessels that the Prophet ﷺ forbade, he prohibited. Hantam and Dabir and all these, this is in Bukhari and so on. So what is this ruling talking about, and are they still forbidden today? And clarify with dalil. So that would be an example of a question. If you were doing fiqh, the example might be, they may bring you an extract from within the fiqh book. So it may say something like, I don't know, like let's say it was to say, I'm just trying to think, anything like, let's say on Raf al-Yadayn, as an example, raising the hands before and after, it may say something like, if it was, ثم ارفعوا ثم ولا ترفع الأيدي عند القيام من الركوع. So for example, Raf al-Yadayn isn't done, it may say, okay, explain what this is talking about, but that's a very self-explanatory, but usually they would provide things which are a bit ambiguous. So they would get an extract of a text which isn't so clear, and they would say, what is this text talking about? Explain, and then give the differences of opinion regarding this ruling. So you would do things like that. In grammar, they would just be simple things like, when I say simple, not simple, but you would just say something like, explain what all the nawasib are, or do the i'rab of this sentence, or here's a poem, can you break down the i'rab and give some, some views like that. So it would be more, but there were never kind of multiple choice in the sense like, is it A, B, or C? We wish they were like that. In fact, the madrasa teachers were so ruthless. I tell you, I heard a teacher once say, because different teachers would set the exams for different books. So if you taught, let's say, Abu Dawood, they might ask you to set the exam. So there was a teacher of ours who taught us Abu Dawood, right? So I'm using him as an example. This guy, oh my God, he had this face. He would scare the hell out of you by just looking at you seriously. And he had a name as well. I don't want to be rude, but he's an amazing person. But his name, his name was Mullah Bakhsh. Those of you that have heard the dialogue, that Mola ko, what is it? Mola no Mola na mare ta Mola nahi marta. That's what the Sultan Rai dialogue. That's what this guy was like. But this, oh my God, he was super punctual. Super punctual. Never seen. I think he must have been the most punctual person in the whole Indian subcontinent. Right. So, and I remember him once sitting down, and he was setting an exam for another book. Like obviously he was just telling us. He's not doing it in front of us. But he goes, this year I've set the exam, for I think Hidayah, which is a fiqh book, or some other book. Say, he goes, I've set it so difficult. So difficult. Watch if anybody passes it. We were like, what the hell? That's not fair. Isn't the whole purpose of an exam to test, to kind of make sure the person knows, not to kind of set them up to fail? That's not the purpose of an exam. So they were very rigorous. So my point of going off on this is that one, people, it can be done. Two, I actually feel it will only be the way forward for people to do this, right? So do not kind of, because there's only so long we can rely on the understanding of other people. Anyway, let's